We'll call the committee of the whole meeting for Monday, February 15, 2021 to order. Roll call, please.
Mayor Gafino?
Here.
Trustee Carroll?
Here.
Trustee Curtis?
Here.
Trustee Gately?
Here.
Trustee Lowry?
Here.
Trustee Martinez?
Here.
Trustee Salazar?
Here.
Dave, any audience comments? You see anybody there currently?
No, Mayor, I do not.
Okay, trustee comments? Discussion. The first item, public workspace needs review. Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Number one item tonight is the space needs analysis study that was done by Legat. They are an architectural firm hired by the village last year to basically look at our facility at Public Works to assess the space that was needed for our current and future equipment, staffing, and operations. Most of our board was able to get to Public Works and take a little tour of it and actually see the facility firsthand in the last couple of weeks. So thank you. We have the architect, Rob Rebel from Legat here tonight, who will do the presentation, walking us through their study and their findings. And the purpose for the discussion tonight is to get direction from the board on whether or not to move forward with the next steps, which would be to basically give the staff the ability to put money in the budget to start architecturals. So essentially designing a more specific concept and getting more specific pricing. With that, I'm going to turn it over to John. Did you want to give it to Legat, or are you going to start first?
No, Legat will start first. Rob's here and he's going to start his presentation and then I'll follow behind him.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for letting me present to you tonight. Just a point of clarification. Am I controlling the presentation or is somebody doing it for me? Because I'm prepared to.
My name's Dave and I'll be doing it. So just tell me next slide when you want me to move on.
All right, next slide. Thanks, Dave. Okay, so as Stephen mentioned, so we began this study a while ago. It's been a little over a year since we started meeting with the Public Works Department. And the goals of the study was, as you see on the screen, to evaluate the existing Public Works Department campus. So we wanted to see the condition of the buildings, evaluate the condition of the site, and then start to identify current and future space needs. So what are your current needs for storage and accommodating your staff, as well as the future? So how many more vehicles, how many more staff need to be accommodated as you look at the right number of people in the Public Works Department to adequately serve the population? And then what are the options for accommodating that future growth? So we were really looking at the campus as a whole, not just the buildings themselves. So next slide, please. So at Leggett, we have a 5-step process that we do planning, whether that's master planning or facility planning, but we have this 5-step process of gather, envision, define, consider, and transform. And gather is really what it sounds like. It's collecting all relevant information. So gathering as much information about your facilities, your vehicles, the site, as I mentioned. Envision is to identify the goals. So what's the purpose of the study? What are we trying to get out of it? What's the end result that we're looking for? Define is to define the requirements. What are the puzzle pieces that need to be put together to come up with a solution? Consider is developing options and meeting collaboratively to review those options and determine what are the best options to suit your needs. And finally, transform is turning the results of the feasibility study into an action plan. So I'm going to walk you through each steps and how they apply to the feasibility study process. Next slide, please. So collect all relevant data. So this is the site plan. So we started here by just getting a site survey of the site, identifying where existing features, amenities are, the buildings, the grading, topography, all of that plays in. Next slide, please. And we met with staff and we toured the facility. So I know the pictures are kind of overlaid here, but we looked at the exterior of the, thank you. exterior of the building to evaluate the condition of the existing building, whether the roofs or the walls. And this was a visual conditions assessment. So it wasn't a detailed analysis of the building, but we got the lay of the land, if you will, by walking around the building and seeing the facility up close. Next image. So even looking at the interior, you can see from this picture that every square inch of the existing building is being utilized for storage. So that was one of the things we noted, is how can we be improving storage for all the various departments that would be on site. Next image. And finally, the vehicles. So we wanted to make sure that we had an understanding of the types of vehicles, the size of vehicles, the vehicles with trailers, making sure that we understood how those vehicles fit in your existing facilities and even an expanded facility as we move forward. How would they fit in those spaces as well in the proposed space? Next slide. So when we met with staff, we had to envision, we had to identify the goals. What are we trying to achieve? So the number one was improve department efficiency. So meaning get as many of the department, if not all of the department, under one roof at one time. So that means creating some office space as well as workshops and storage areas. Provide comparable amenities to other facilities. And this goes with the gender equality and ADA compliance. So providing locker rooms that's appropriate for the staff, whatever gender they be. ADA compliance throughout the entire facility. So locker rooms, shower facilities, training facilities, a place to shelter in place if there's a severe weather event. Those types of amenities we were looking to incorporate into the design. Promote energy efficiency. So obviously we want the building to be energy efficient and not be losing heat. So could we add insulation to the existing building or a new building that could be proposed or an addition? Dedicated shop space and tool storage. You could see from that one photograph that there's a lot of stuff all over the place. But so the crew said, you know, we need a place to work. We want a dedicated shop area where we can safely have our tools, safely work without a lot of clutter, have those tools properly stored in lockable cabinets or lockable cages, have indoor storage space elsewhere. So increasing indoor storage space didn't necessarily mean just tools and things for vehicles, things for the department, but things from the village, having general storage for the various displays, seasonal items that might need to be stored on site. Another goal was getting all vehicles under one roof. So that came back to us understanding what your vehicles are, how many there are, what the lengths, the sizes, the widths, the purpose, so that we could understand how big the facility would need to be to get all the vehicles under one roof. Improving security. So this was, again, tied to the next one, separating visitors from staff. So there should be a public entrance to the building is what the staff told us. And that should be separate from the rest of the facility. So there should be a public zone and a private zone, if you will. And that private zone is the part of the facility that your crews are working in and they're managing. But when we talked about security, we talked about secure entry sequences. We talked about cameras and card readers and those types of things. And then finally, good vehicular circulation around the site. So good traffic flow. We know that we're most likely going to have one driveway off of Butterfield Road, but once you're on site, the circulation should be very quick and easy to navigate for vehicles, whether that's visitors coming to the site or village staff. Next slide, please. Defining the problem, as you can see, was spreadsheets. So that's where we started with the space needs analysis. So that's in the blue spreadsheet that's in the background is a list of all the spaces that you currently have and the proposed spaces. So yeah, I don't think the slides are set up to, unlike the photographs, they just layer like this. So I didn't want to spend too much time in getting into too much detail, but basically it's a listing of all the existing spaces plus all the proposed spaces that were recommended to make the facility successful to support your needs. And we wanted to make sure that we understood how many staff would be in the building today versus in the future. And that number was 27 in case you're curious. The green spreadsheets were the vehicles. So we had a list of all the vehicles. And if you were to zoom in and take a closer look, you could see that the size of each vehicle is identified. So again, we wanted to make sure we understood how multiple vehicles might fit in a single bay in a garage if necessary. Next slide, please. So developing options collaboratively. So this was the consider process. So we started by looking at a site plan. and we brought three-dimensional blocks. So at this point, you saw we had a list of the spaces, so we knew what types of spaces you wanted in the building. We had an idea of what the size was, so we created little colored blocks, and you can kind of see them in the photograph. You can see a green block and a orange block and a yellow block. Those all represented different parts of the facility. And we asked the staff to rearrange those. And every time we came up with a new group or grouping or layout for the building, a floor plan, we took a picture of that and we rearranged it again and kept going until I think we had 9 options. And then from those 9, another 3 evolved. So in total, we looked at 12 different options for how to rearrange the facility. But the important part was that it was from your staff, that everybody, all the stakeholders were able to participate in their process and give their input. If you'll hit the next slide, please. And what came out of that was drawings like this. So this is an example of option 8. So all of the options were pinned up on the wall, and every staff member got to vote. So they would put yellow stickers on the option that best suited their needs. And we didn't let them off the hook with just that. We wanted to identify why. So there is a list of pros and cons for each one of these options that would ultimately help us narrow it down to 2 options. That's what I'm going to present tonight. Next slide, please. So transform is creating the action plan, right? That's the potential solution to the problem and how we move forward. So this is option 1, and I'll talk about the site plan as a whole first, and then we'll talk about the floor plan in the next slide. But on the right-hand side is Butterfield Road, and you can see where it says access gate. That would be the primary driveway from Butterfield Road. So going from north to south, so left to right. I'm sorry, other way around, right to left. So you would enter the site from that point. Village vehicles could go straight in, and you see that red dashed line there represents the secured gate. So that's the way that separates that public area from private area. So if you were a visitor coming to the site, you would get to that gate and immediately turn left and go into a visitor parking area. And from there, you could go from your vehicle into the administrative offices. That's in that kind of pinkish bar on the north side of the building. So we talked about creating a new front entrance to the building. So wrapping new construction around the existing warehouse. So that would provide a new face to the facility, and that would become the administrative offices and the public face where the visitors would enter and leave. So if you're going from the access gate directly into the west yard, there would be parking spaces there for staff to park their vehicles, and also access. You can see that the colored bars of the main building have arrows coming through them. So we envisioned where there would be pull-through bays for all the vehicles. So some of the bays in the existing building are not pull-through, others are, so we kind of indicated arrows, but we wanted to make sure that the west yard and the east yard on the other side were large enough so that vehicles could pull through, or if vehicles needed to park or stage or load equipment, that they had plenty of space to do that in maneuvering room. You can see the slow release tank that's related to the water treatment plant. So that was an amenity that the staff said, you know what, we really don't want to spend money on that or the existing water treatment plant. They're in good condition. We want to stay away from those areas. So we kept the building east of there, the proposed addition, but improved the 2-way traffic lane continuing to the south. And we decided, let's reuse the driveway that goes to the emergency response training area. So that driveway that's already existing, that's south of the water treatment plant, we said, let's reuse that amenity and make that part of the loop that brings us down to the east side and back around. So there's a staging area next to the water treatment plant. The salt dome gets relocated and expanded to where you can see in the salt storage. Salt loading zone, that staging area, one large group of area of asphalt that would be, give the trucks and the front end loaders plenty of maneuverability around that end of the site. And then again, the east yard is large enough for vehicles to stage and do their thing before leaving the site at the access gate. So you can see there's a nice circulation loop. It's not necessarily one way because we want to give a lot of flexibility, but you could imagine that there's a one-way loop that would keep it very simple for drivers and staff to drive around the site. Off to the left, the existing water tower stays as is, and we would improve the material storage bays all the way at the far left end of the site. So whether that road gets paved or remains, aggregate fill, but those material storage bins would be improved with concrete walls and a roof so that those materials would be better protected. Next slide, please. So if we look a little closer at the floor plan for option 1, so you can see the dark dashed line, the black dashed line, that represents the footprint of the existing building. So in this option, we're looking at how to best reuse that space and add on to it. So let me start with the new construction off on the right. So as I mentioned, that's the new public face. That's the new administrative offices for all the staff to come to. So you can see there's a reception area on the lower right-hand corner. So visitors would be coming in a secure entry sequence to that point to be greeted by a receptionist or some other employee of the offices before they can gain access to the rest of it. But there's spaces for offices with windows to the east as well as to the north. There's some open office space proposed for workers that are supporting the administrators, IT space for the servers, other IT equipment, plus toilets, custodial space, support spaces for the offices, and then a break room, training room in the upper corner. So the areas in blue were more those support spaces for the staff working in the garages. And those were looked at as like a transition zone. So the tool storage, the laundry room, the women's locker room, the break room, training room, men's locker room. We looked at that as almost like a progression from clean space to dirty space, or more importantly, the other way. If you're going from the garage into the offices, you could go to the laundry room to drop off what you need to there. You could stop in the locker room to change your clothes or take off your jacket, put your jacket in your locker before going into the office. So it's really literally and figuratively a buffer zone between the offices and the garages. When we looked at the repurposing the existing garage, and the building seems to be in pretty good shape. The structure is certainly sound. The siding generally looks to be in pretty good shape. So we felt pretty good about reusing that. And when we talked about the best way to repurpose that space, in this option, we're suggesting that the vehicle maintenance bays are in this building in addition to heated vehicle storage. And the reason for that is the bays are nice and wide. There's a lot of space between overhead doors, which leaves a lot of space in between vehicles. And the vehicle maintenance bays require that, right? As crews are working around the vehicles, changing tires, replacing parts, cleaning the vehicles, whatever, they need a lot of room. So we said, maybe that's the best way to repurpose the existing building because the larger bays are already there. And then in the upper left-hand corner of that orange box that represents fleet maintenance would be the maintenance shop, storage, office, basically all the support for the mechanics that are working on the vehicles. And then the remaining gray area in that building would be for larger, more oversized vehicles that best could take advantage of the vehicle bays in the existing building. To the left of the fleet maintenance is the water department and the streets department. So again, that's kind of a buffer zone between the two garages. So the white bar would be a corridor that connects the two garages, but then you have the water storage or water department on top, streets department on the bottom. And the idea was that both of those departments want exterior access. They want doors so that if their vehicles pull up on the west side or the east side, they can go right into the department, get the materials, the valves, the tools, whatever they need, throw it on the truck and leave. But if the vehicles are inside the bays or in the maintenance bays, they also have easy access to both of the garages, so they can load their vehicles or get the supplies they need before they leave the garage and have easy access to those two departments and all their amenities. The purple area is the addition for all the heated vehicle storage. So again, we weren't limited by the dimensions of the existing building. So this building, we figured let's pack in all the rest of the vehicles that we can. So we kept the bays very tight. Again, the length of the vehicles was critical because we wanted to make sure that we could get a vehicle and a trailer, or two vehicles or three even, depending on the length, in each one of these bays. So between the number of bays and the new building here and the existing building, we can accommodate all of the village's existing public works vehicles plus a few extra for future expansion. The green bar on the left is general building storage for all of those seasonal displays and other things in general storage that the village has a need for. And finally, in the lower left corner is the wash bay. So that would be a pull-through bay. If you imagine that circulation loop I talked around on the site where you could drive counterclockwise around the site, as you're coming around by the water tank, the salt dome, and past the water treatment plant, you could pull pull right into the wash bay, clean up your vehicle before proceeding out of the east gate and back to Butterfield Road. Okay, next slide, please. Sorry, I'm pausing. I'm probably talking too fast. I apologize. But I want to be mindful of your time. So option two. So option two is very, very similar to option one. There's just some subtle changes, but the site plan is virtually identical. So I'm not going to spend any time talking about the site plan. Well, let's skip to the next slide and we'll talk specifically about the building plan. So there's a couple differences here, and this really had to do with where each of the departments really wanted to be located. So again, we have the gray bar in the middle of the plan, and that's the heated vehicle storage. That's the existing building to remain. The administrative offices in that purplish color and the blue, all in the same position. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time about that. But you'll notice that the street department and the water department are now on the west side of the building. So they felt better that they were combined together, that their vehicles, they could load and offload equipment, or interchange vehicles and equipment with their departments better on the west side of the building in a combined warehouse. So in between tool storage and the women's locker room, there's a corridor where you can get from the garages to those departments and all their amenities. So they still have indoor connectivity to their vehicles in the garages. But they felt strongly that they liked that the departments were together on the west side of the building. And the other big change was the fleet maintenance department. Again, they didn't like that department, wanted to be close to the wash bay, and they kind of wanted to be out of the way. They said there's a lot of activity, excuse me, a lot of activity with vehicles coming and going, equipment coming and going off of the vehicles. They didn't want to be in the middle of it. So if you remember in the last option, they were at the left end of the gray box in the existing building. They said, we'd rather be out of the way so that all the vehicles in the existing building and the new building could come and go out of their pull-through bays or their one-way bays, and maintenance is kind of off to the side. So all the way on the left, you see the orange boxes where the vehicle maintenance bays are. Their office, library, maintenance, tool storage is in between their bays, and then they're close to the wash bay. So the general building storage, wash bay are where they're at. But the big change was vehicle maintenance is off to the side. That way, if they have a vehicle that's in a bay, but in a second vehicle outside the building, it could be staged outside of their bays, and it's not at all creating a traffic jam or any kind of obstruction to the work that's happening in the east and west yard. So that's the biggest change from this plan to the next. Next slide, please. So if we look at these two options, we did prepare preliminary cost estimates for both. And option one was just over $12 million. And in the document that we put together that documents the entire study that we did, there is a breakdown. You can see a little bit more detail what that estimate is. Next slide, please. We'll bring up the next option. Option two comparatively is $13 million. And the difference is primarily in the building itself. Even though the footprint looks to be about the same, option two, the building is a little bit larger, but just the movement of the pieces added to the cost. So the vehicle maintenance, that fleet maintenance department, that's one of the most expensive parts of the building because of vehicle lifts and equipment and oil separators and the lubrication systems and hoses and reels and all that kind of stuff. So putting that, changing that from the existing building to the new building added some additional cost. There's some other little things here and there, but option two is a little bit more expensive than option one. Next slide, please. So when we originally started the study, there was, or had gotten to the point of doing the cost estimate, there was a little bit of pushback saying, this is really beyond the amount of money that the village was considering spending on this. So we created another option that would look at the possibility of phasing construction. So we looked at option one and we said, well, if fleet maintenance and the water department, streets department are back in the middle of the building, and if we put general storage back in the middle, could we set up an option that could be expanded in the future? So if you go to the next slide, please. The site plan is very similar, but we said, how do we reduce the size of the project overall So to come up with a smaller budget, but create a building that could be expanded in the future. So that's what was this exercise was. This ended up with about an $8.8 million option. And you can see the dash box on the left indicates how the additional garage space could be added at a later date if that was so desired. So next slide, please. So in summary, those are the three options that that we put together, and I would be more than happy to answer any questions that you might have at this time.
I have a question. Looking at the three different options, and then options 1 and 2, where you have the new, well, I would be the addition. What's the size difference between that and the option 1 phase? You know, is there? It looks like it's hard to tell off the
There,
drawing.
and I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but it's probably about 5,000 square feet. They're very similar. They're very similar in the footprint. Like I said, it was really the types of the spaces and where they're being relocated that had majority of the cost.
So in this, all right, thank you for that. So on the option 1 phased, and I noticed you know, for future expansion, you have those little dots, which is good. Is that going to meet our needs space wise?
It won't meet,
Sure.
no, this will not meet your needs immediately, meaning there won't be enough. If the goal is to get all the vehicles under heated vehicle storage, this does not meet that goal. We can't get all of your existing vehicles in the bays in this option.
So option 1 phase, technically, we still have vehicles sitting outside.
Correct.
Okay.
You know, I would almost argue in favor of just getting the whole thing completed at once, because we know, you know, our costs are going to be a little bit more fixed now than going forward. We don't know what the costs are going to be, the material costs, the labor costs. You know, and then this way we're getting all the trucks heated. You know, our staff's had to put up with quite a bit in the old location, and I'd like to get them moved into a new place as soon as possible. And I think it's, you know, just rip the Band-Aid off at this point.
No, you're correct. Go down, they go up.
Yeah, and sometimes when you set up projects twice, it costs you that much more. So, I mean, if our cost is 8 million for option 1 phased, you know, chances are it's going to be far higher than 13 later on if you add them both.
Right.
So,
I'd like to make one other comment about the cost. So this is a very preliminary study. So there are contingencies built in there, and the numbers are total project cost, meaning we've tried to anticipate all the costs. So there's money in there for a design contingency and a construction contingency that's at 10%. So there's just about $2 million in contingencies built into these numbers. So meaning there's unknowns on the design process. There's always unknowns during the construction process. So as the design becomes more determined and more than identified, you know, that the design contingency would be reduced. I'd still recommend that you hold a construction contingency. There's a lot that we don't know about the site. There's some low areas between the existing building and the water treatment plant that might need to be filled, some drainage that might need to be provided there. So there's, right now, like I said, we're carrying about $2 million just to cover the unknown, which would come out of the project to some extent when you get to the next step and having, you know, architect and engineering studies that are done more completely. But there's also dollar amount for furniture in there too. We know that some office furniture might be required in the new facility. So there's a little bit of padding in there, I guess is what I'm trying to tell you. But there's a lot that we don't know in both, in all of them, actually.
Which option was the staff preferred option?
John, to be honest, I don't know if they had one out of the two.
I think out of the two, the staff preferred option 2, but we would be perfectly happy with option 1 as well.
John, when we took the tour, or when I took the tour, I recall, didn't we talk about the fact that, like we did with the silo, that when we bid these different components of this separately, that could also reduce the costs as well, correct?
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was going to start explaining a little bit about the next steps. That's exactly right, Trustee Carroll. So like what our next steps would kind of look like is there's really three components we'd look at. It'd be kind of looking for an architect, an engineer, and then a construction manager. And the goal of that next phase would be to have an architect develop plans that would be in detail enough for a construction manager to refine or get us a really tight estimate of cost on what the project would be.
And then also with the construction manager, as John was alluding to, is what we've learned is by bringing a construction manager in, they can look at those designs and figure out whether or not some of those things are buildable and what the actual costs in the real world at that time are. So we've learned that that's one way to reduce costs as well. Engineering, we talked about hiring an engineer and then possibly using our village engineer as the person to kind of check the engineer's work to see that it's in line. So that's in the past, we used to have someone design it, and then we'd have to have a private engineering firm review it. Now with the village engineer on staff, we'd be able to have an engineering firm design it and have our in-house engineering review it as well. So there's some cost savings there. And then the third thing about the architect, and this is something John and I are just really starting to hone in on now, is the process for the architect. It could be anywhere from, $0 to $150,000 to design a building. I'm just throwing out a rough number there. But what we're thinking of doing is phasing it. So at least we get a concept that's designed by the architect and have an ability to hit the pause button, bring it back to the board, show the board what the concept is that's being honed in on and what a more realistic expectation of cost is at that time. And the board can make that choice to move forward, or just stop the project altogether at that point.
Hey, Steve, what is our funding mechanism for this project?
Well, right now we haven't sat down and actually done all of how we would do it, but a lot of it would include, we do have some reserves in our capital fund. So that would be an initial investment into the project, is to use some of those reserves most likely. The rest of it could be bonding. The way that we're trying to look at our bond is we'd like to do it so that it coincides with the police department bonds expiring.
And that's what, 2025 or what, when was that?
I don't have it right off the top of my head. I want to say it's 2029.
Okay. And we just dropped off the library funding bonds, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Trustee Lauer, any comments?
I'm completely in favor of actually option 2. If indeed we can afford the cost of that. Is there any possibility of it going over that amount? You mentioned some unknowns.
So one of the, we have a placeholder for site work, right? We tried to estimate the amount of asphalt paving there would be, stone bases, things like that. But unsuitable soil is always a concern, meaning the soil has to have enough load bearing capacity to carry the weight of the building. Same thing with the asphalt. You have to put the right base underneath the asphalt so it doesn't crumble over time or under the weight of the vehicle. So one of the biggest unknowns, I would say, is just the quality of the earth, if you will, on the site, and that would have to be tested. So normally what we do is once we have a rough footprint of the building, we would recommend getting some soil borings down to about 25 or 30 feet and have a testing agent analyze the cores to confirm what the consistency of the soil is, if there's any contamination on site. Because I really don't know if there are concerns with contamination. So that's something we'd have to figure out. And that's part of the reason why I recommend that design contingency stay there for now, at least until we have a better idea of what the soil conditions really are.
So that extra contingency actually is kind of covering for any unexpected increase, huh?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm very much inclined to go with it. I think it's a great idea. But I'm as concerned as the rest of the board with the funding process and if we have those funds to do it. So,
Hey, Steve, can somebody give me some clarification just from a cost benefit analysis? the difference between option 1 and option 2, we're looking at $1 million. Are we going to get $1 million of bang for our buck? John had mentioned that, they could live with option 1. So I wouldn't be in favor of financing an additional $1 million if we don't need to. However, if we're going to get more than $1 million in benefits and cost savings, then that certainly should be thought about as well.
And John let me answer that in two ways. First, I'll clarify that I did just look it up, and our last payment on the police bond is in 2029. And so one of the other things I didn't mention, and Bill would have probably pointed this out, is not only do have we built up a nice reserve in our capital fund, but we also have, as you know, the board here has always dedicated funding to our capital program, in my opinion, almost as strong as I've seen anywhere. And we have dedicated funds that go into our capital program every year now, i.e. some of the taxes that we collect for, let's say, the dispensary and other sales tax. And we do fund it, and that is a mechanism that would help us pay the debt annually. So, I mean, we do have such strong sales tax revenue here. So that was one of the things Bill and I talked about, is what we had going into our capital fund only a couple of years ago was good, but now it's extremely solid what we've been able to put in annually into the reserves. So
right, does that justify spending an additional $1 million just because we're in a strong revenue position?
Well, and the second point is, I wouldn't say that we would have to pick any options tonight. The truth is these are two options that are good options. But as I would suspect, and John, correct me if I'm wrong, but as we hone in on an actual concept, it might even be a marriage of the two options in front of you. I think when you sit down, you look at what it is on paper, and you go into the actual architectural drawings of the building, you're going to really focus on which concept makes the most sense. And I think that's where you're going to get that tighter number.
What accounts for the difference? What more do you get in option 2 for $1 million? Is there more square footage, or what is substantially the difference that creates that price difference?
It's a little more square footage, but it was primarily I'll be honest, when we do a study like this, we're using generic cost per square foot. And the cost per square foot for new construction is always higher than the cost per square foot for renovating. So we looked at the cost, and the fleet maintenance has the highest cost per square foot, and it's primarily because of demand of equipment to support that function in the building. So I can describe it as that it's a higher square foot cost based on the equipment, but I couldn't give you much more detail than that. That's why I agree with Mr. Bosco's recommendation is don't focus so much on that $1 million difference. I would say focus on the option that you feel best serves your needs. And then once the plan is developed a little further and the construction manager can add their input on the cost, I would say react at that time. Meaning if $12 million is your preferred budget, then the project can be adjusted at that time. But it's hard for me to say specifically at this scale, because this is such a rough diagram, why there's $1 million difference.
And just to make a point of clarification, I think in some of the walkthroughs I mentioned this, but in one of our comparable communities that we talk to on a regular basis, they had just built a building a few years ago. And when they went through the process, it was the same thing. They got a large number at the beginning, and through the construction management process, they started looking at things that were really necessary. And they were able to weed out things like molding in certain areas that they didn't need, that would cut tens of thousands of dollars off the price. They would just keep going down that list and finding things that made sense that they didn't actually need. And they reduced the cost significantly that way, further into the process.
Yeah, I think what appeals with me about option 2 is actually the physical plan itself, with the maintenance department and the wash department all being back there kind of behind and out of the way of the rest of the areas for day-by-day functioning and operation for streets and so forth, and snow plowing and leaf collecting and all that. So that's why I kind of been leaning towards the option 2 myself, just because of that. It seems like a more sensible floor plan, although option 1 is certainly acceptable, I guess. But I kind of went out with I like the argument of the mechanics saying they'd like to be out of the way of the hustle of the day-by-day operations. That's why. Otherwise, either one is fine with me.
Do we all agree, do a complete build out versus that third option of
yes.
Yeah. I think we should do it all at once instead of phasing it in.
Agreed. My only concern is that this addresses the village's needs today. What about 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Is there any room for expansion in the future, or is there anything we should be looking at? I mean, I guess, how much is the village going to grow that we might need more space?
That's a good question, right? That I thought it was the same question. Is it a 20-year build out or 10-year, or
Yeah,
where did you put us?
Yeah, good point.
So this has been real positive feedback, because when we first started this project, I think the staff, believe it or not, even when we look at these things, we are always looking at what way can we either save money or do something cost effective, because just because we need the space doesn't mean we need to have a castle, so to speak. We just want a workable space. So when we look at this, you can't really expand too far to the south because of the treatment plant there. There's actually pipes in the ground and whatnot, and that's why that building footprint pretty much stops right there. But ultimately, we did hear that from a few of the trustees on the walkthrough, that if we did this, you got to account for the future. And right now, this building layout only has space for a few extra vehicles, but not much. So what we need to do is sit down, and that might be that option between 1 and 2, where we look down and say, is this layout, is there that extra 5,000 square feet or whatnot that the architect was talking about? Does that give us any potential to expand another spot or two? Population wise, we're not that far off from where we'll probably be. We should get our census numbers back by summer this year. We anticipate being somewhere in the low to mid 18,000 range. But ultimately, I mean, we did acquire some future annexation rights to lands out to the west, but I don't think anyone on the staff here is estimating our population would go anywhere, higher than between 22 and 25,000.
Are you planning on tearing down the original building in the 70s at the south end there? That gone?
Yeah, I'm anticipating that that's the low point from a topographical standpoint of the entire site, and that's kind of where I'm anticipating that Kane County's stormwater ordinance will require us to include a retention basin at this time down there.
Yeah, my only concern, like I said, it's big enough, so we're not doing this in 5 years. So I do like the valley added, costs, so they can cut back on things as we move forward. And I don't know if you can pick up any space on the west side there where the building jogs from the existing building. It looks like it's a 10 feet, or I don't know what it is, but it kind of jogs. I don't know if you could pick up some square footage there, and if you do save money somewhere else, pick that up. My other question too is any consideration for like solar panels or charging stations, things like that, if we are looking 10, 20 years down the road.
So that's always something that we can look into. We didn't talk about that specifically. Unfortunately, the building is oriented the wrong way. You want your solar panels facing south primarily if you can. So laying the panels flat, directly on the roofs, they'd be facing the wrong way. But there's always an opportunity to put them up on stanchions to get them facing south. But it's definitely something that could be considered in the future.
Mm-hmm. I think it's well thought out. It's great that we had employee input. The $1 million difference to me, I mean, over 20 years, 30 years, if that increases productivity, or if there's some benefit there, something to consider.
Agreed.
Any other comments?
Yeah, the way I see it also is, it's if we spend an extra $1 million on it, if we can perhaps not outgrow this building for the next 10, 15 years or 20, it's worth spending it.
Any other thoughts? Okay.
So I guess the last thing, Mayor Gaffino, would be is at this point, if the board has direction to the staff, the timing of it's perfect, because what we would do now is we would put money in the next year's upcoming budget, which you're about to review in the next 2 months, and we would put money in the budget for the actual architecturals.
Okay. Does that sound like what we want to do?
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Good, yeah.
Okay. Anything else, Steve?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Great presentation.
Thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate being part of your meeting tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Okay, on to item 2, Brother Chimp special use. Steve?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I will not only introduce it, but I will walk us through this as Mr. Toth is unavailable tonight. So item number 2 on your agenda is a special use for Brother Chimp and the microbrewery out by Randall and Orchard. Just as a point of reference, this is something that normally the process would be that this would go to the Plan Commission first as they review all special uses. And then it would go to the Committee of the Whole. And then from Committee of the Whole, it would go to Village Board. We're doing it a little out of order this time. We're going to do the Committee of the Whole first. And then Mr. Newman, who's on the call tonight, is taking his petition to the Plan Commission on March 2nd. And then it will go back to the Village Board for direct vote unless the board has any issues. And the reason we're doing that is when we were reached out to by the business with COVID-19 and all the restrictions in place, his intention is to try to get this expansion of his business as soon as possible so that he can safely bring people into the business and socially distance. So I'm going to walk us through what the actual request is at this time. So Brother Chimp got a special use for a microbrewery back in June of 2019. They opened in the spring of 2020. The owner is requesting use of an adjacent storefront and outdoor beer garden that would be behind both of those tenant spaces. What happens is because his use, which is microbrewery, was approved by a special use, any expansion of that facility is basically what we call an intensification of the use, requiring an additional special use. So he is getting, this is very similar to the marijuana dispensary we just reviewed and the church expansion on Banbury, where essentially they were special uses, but because they've expanded their footprint, it required an additional special use to be granted. The original plan was to extend into the adjacent property, but after we talked to the business owner, he also expressed interest in a beer garden. And because that would have required a special use as well, because that would have been another addition, we've actually, the petitioner has put them both in this application. That's why you're reviewing a beer garden in February when it's like -10 outside. But that's because it's for a future expansion. So he would like to go through the process all at once and hopefully get the special use approved so he can build the beer garden later. The staff discussed as I said, it already requires a special use. Owner is looking to expand ACP, as I said, for COVID so that they can socially distance people indoors. The next door expansion into the neighboring property is essentially just for seating. He is not looking to do any of the brewing operations. It would just be a small remodel, which I believe opening up a wall and creating a seating area in the adjacent storefront. The outdoor area essentially takes out 4 parking spaces, including 1 accessible parking space, which would be relocated. He would like to extend a curb from the walkway behind the building to build a concrete slab in which he would then put up a canvas enclosure with plastic walls. And that would also require a supplemental outdoor liquor license further down the line, which at that time, more of the elements of the outdoor seating area would be reviewed. But essentially, that's what's in front of you today is the petitioner wanting to expand into the neighboring storefront for seating and a future beer garden in the back.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
The beer garden, is that going to be permanent? You made a comment about the walls being erected, or is this just going to be, for during the whole COVID lockdown restriction?
No, this would be a future beer garden to actually be permanent. The area right now, under one of our executive orders, we allow people to set up temporary outdoor beer garden areas. Typically, it's in any spaces in the front of your business. So he actually took advantage of that last year. This would be a permanent place behind the building.
In the rear. So would there be any concerns with any of the other tenants as far as having accessibility to load and unload?
I think he's on the call, so I can turn it to Stephen Newman to answer any of those questions. But at this time, it would only be behind his 2 properties.
Right, but I know that driveway back there, it's, it's not too wide. So if he's extending out, 15, 20 feet, would a delivery truck be able to get through? We don't want to create a public safety hazard either.
Okay. And what I can do, Trustee Curtis, once again, it's kind of, that's a type of question that we would most likely get at the Plan Commission. So what I can do too is, even if we didn't have the answer for that right now, I could definitely bring that up with the Plan Commission when Mike and I meet with them on March 2nd and
I have a
raise that as
thought.
a possible concern.
I have a thought along with that, with Trustee Curtis's safety issue, but any barriers so cars don't drive in there, or, the temporary ones, I don't think we required it, but I mean, this is gonna be a permanent situation, you're just sitting back there and in a parking lot. So I don't know if there's any requirements as far as any type of barriers or any type of safety.
Yeah, especially, there's also that, the bank drive-through is right back there too.
Yeah.
Well, it looks like from the drawings in the packet that it's only going out so far as the the edge of the
Correct.
parking spot, right?
Right.
But yeah, I agree. If it's just like a short plastic wall, that doesn't give you much comfort if you're sitting there right against the wall where traffic's moving right next to that arrow in that picture.
Right.
Generally, I'm in favor. I'm okay with it. The one question I was going to ask is, does this place, do they serve food?
No, they do not.
So you have access through that back door? Is that how you get in there? Would it be a controlled access to that tent then, the back door, Steve?
Yes. And I'm trying to find it real quick in our code. We have provisions for outdoor areas where liquor is served in our liquor code.
Don't we require food to be served?
Not for a microbrewery.
Oh, okay.
I'm okay with it. It looks like a small 28 by 36, 10, 12 feet high, according to the drawing. I don't know, what is the roof made out of?
I believe canvas.
Does that have to be the code for safety, like winds or things like that, Steve?
I don't know if it meets, as far as building code goes, I'm not sure at this point, but Mike Tote did review this before he left. And, that's his department that oversees those codes. And he did not mention anything about wind issues.
All right, thanks.
Steve, I don't know if I can, am I live or not?
Oh, there you are.
Yeah. So it actually probably would wind up being a metal roof. So it would be a structure that would be able to hold snow in the winter and not have any concerns about that.
Yeah, because we had a lot of snow this winter.
Is it going to be attached to the building then, I guess?
Yeah, it would be attached to the building and come all the way out. So that way, if we needed to, we could have some doors to be able to control traffic in terms of people as well. And the idea is that we would bring the curb out flat from where it is now. So you would have quite a substantial curb there in terms of any traffic and keeping it from driving up onto it. And actually, probably
would the curb go past the edge of your wall there, further out? Is there a little extra room beyond that wall where the traffic is? In other words, the curb adjacent to the end of the wall. Is that all the further it goes out?
Yeah, it would go to the edge of the parking lot. So basically where the parking spaces are now, that's what I would be taking up. But instead of right now, there's a pretty big slope. It's hard to tell from the picture in terms of going down for drainage off the parking lot. By putting in the concrete slab, my hope would be to level that out. And you'd probably wind up with a 6-inch to probably closer to a foot or more curb that way in terms of traffic and kind of helping to protect people from traffic.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I don't have any problem with it.
Yeah, I like the idea of the metal roof. I think the metal roof would be a nice addition for him. And if it helps in any way his business, I feel for all of our businesses that could be struggling as a result of all of this situation. So
Are we gonna put any sort of restriction on, or do we need to, about live music or entertainment outside?
That would only be, they'd have to get a supplemental entertainment license if they wanted to do that.
Okay.
And if it was, let's say, a supplemental B license, that requires board review the first year.
I have a question. Why do the patio to the rear versus the front of the property? Because you would think the front footage off of Orchard Road would be a little bit more marketable instead of just the rear entrance in the middle of a drive-through lane. I'm not quite sure I understand why that location was chosen.
Well, partly because, you know, from the landlord's perspective, I don't think they want me obstructing something in front. From the other tenant's perspective too, if I have something out there, it's kind of blocking some of their frontage view and everything. So I thought it would be more acceptable to the other tenants and to the landlord to be in the back. I mean, the front is great. It just,
yeah, it's just, you know, I just have a problem with the drive-through being there because the way that drive-through is configured, you have to drive the entire rear length to get in. If there's 2 or 3 cars in line, and the problem with that drive-through is, I don't understand why they did this, but they have the ATM in the drive-up window in the exact same lane. So that line tends to get a little extended because you've got people using the teller as well as waiting in line for the ATM.
That's on the east end though, that ATM. I mean, that's about as far away as possible, I think, right? Isn't Brother Chimp? So you're way at almost the other end, right?
Right. We're talking where the striped spot is. That's the handicap spot that would be moved. So it's right back there is where I would be. And, you know, honestly, we've kind of had it over the past year as part of the.
It'd be the same as cars are parked back there, right? You're just in the parking spaces, so.
Right.
Right, so I don't think it's gonna obstruct any traffic flow. You're, I don't even know, 200-300 feet from the other building.
Name it. I mean, if the line was backing up that far, then those would be spots that wouldn't be
right
usable anyway, and there'd be more of a traffic problem if they were spots and people trying to get in and out.
My concern isn't the backup. My concern is the accessibility to the drive-up lane. If you come from on the right and there's 2 or 3 cars, most people, you have to go all the way to the far left to get in, and now you're driving the entire length of the rear of the building to get in line.
Well, I guess what I'm confused about is I'm not taking any of that space. I'm not taking any space.
Are you saying, Laura, that they turn around in the parking spaces? Is that what you're thinking?
No, I'm saying that to get to the east side of the building, to get to that drive-through,
right?
A lot of times you have to come in to the west through the west side entrance. So now they're going to be driving, you know, you're going to get a lot of traffic driving past to get to that far east side of the building. Because if you come in from the east entrance and there's 2 or 3 cars there.
Right. You have to circle around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
you're thinking that's going to bother them sitting in the tent?
I'm just saying it's you know, like a Friday afternoon. I go to that bank quite often. I've got my business account there, and you know, and I know maybe with COVID just because the lobby was closed, but there's a lot of traffic back there. And so again, I'm addressing it from a public safety perspective, in that, you know, 90% of those drive up customers are going to be driving the length of the rear of that building.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't want to see anybody walk out and get hit by a car.
Right.
Well, they're not going to be, okay, so maybe that's a clarification too. I would have like a half wall back there. It's not like people are going to be able to step off of the curb into the parking lot.
And where would your door, you're not going to have a door access on that south side, right?
So there's the double door that you can barely see back there, which is how people would access it.
Okay.
And then basically I would have some sort of sidewalls, gated area to make sure that there wasn't a, you know, they can't walk out, and they would walk back into that, and there would be, you know, kind of a little half wall all the way around it. So there's not the opportunity for somebody to be able to walk off that back end into traffic.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
But to leave that tent though, do they have to go back through the building, or are you going to have access on that little sidewalk right behind the building there?
Go through the building. I mean, I would have gates, so in case of emergency, people would be penned in, but the appropriate access would be through the building.
I'm okay with the concept. The only issue I have from a safety standpoint is that first couple parking spots on the same size, right? Like right where go back, if you could go back to that last slide you had, Dave. Like the one right next to this, what would be the east wall. If you're backing out of there, you can't see it. You're not going to be able to see anything coming from the west. And that could potentially pose a problem.
Well,
Yeah,
my plan actually is to just have a low wall there and then have it be clear plastic in terms of being a wind block for people that could zip up or come down. So they would be able to still see.
Okay.
Not like it's going to be all blocked in because, you know, people want that clear line of sight who are sitting back there too. They don't want to.
Right. I'm just, that would be that first spot could potentially be obstructed. But other than that, I think I don't have a problem with it. I like it.
Trustee Carroll, to your questions earlier and to some of the other questions, I looked up, so I have the liquor code in front of us, just so everyone's on the same page. We have a separate section for supplemental outdoor liquor and the requirements. And in there, it does say things like, the enclosure for the outside area must be constructed of a solid material in harmony with the architecture of the building, at least 3 feet and no more than 6 feet in height, continuous span except for emergency exits. Outside shall have sufficient lighting and to provide safety to customers. And then it does say here that about music, it says a licensee shall not allow entertainment with the use of amplified sound in the outside area except in conformance with the requirements of our noise ordinance, which would also, because he's a liquor license holder, he would still have to get those supplemental liquor licenses.
Any other thoughts?
I have one. And a lot of the gas stations, what they do is where there's a lot of traffic, they have those concrete poles, right, just to buff any type of incidents or situations that come arise with somebody hitting the corners. Is that something that will be implemented here? Because I mean, I would think it's a matter of safety.
That was my concern as well. Yeah.
So I want it to be safe, so I certainly consider putting something in like that. I mean,
yeah, it would.
The last thing I want is for any of my patients to be hurt.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and it's probably a good protection for you because I can't tell you how many times they hit those corners. So I mean, just to have one of those big along the ends to basically protect your structure is probably a good measure.
Right, like a Jersey rail or something. Yeah.
Yeah. That was just a suggestion again, but I was wondering.
Trustee Salazar, any comments?
I don't have any problem with design. I guess I just had one thought in what Trustee Curtis was saying in terms of how far it comes out. Is there any possibility that you could make it longer, more the width of the building, and make it come out? You know, not as far, but you'd still have the same amount of space. You know, I mean, just like kind of extend the wall a different way so that it's not so far out in the parking lot. I mean, I don't have a problem with it. I think it's a great idea. I guess I thought maybe that might be something where it wouldn't be as extending out as far into the parking lot. Do you know what I mean? Just like push in the wall, push it in and make it just longer the other way.
Yeah. Part of the problem with that is I'm trying to maintain it so that I'm just taking the area that's directly behind.
Oh, okay. All right. That makes sense.
All right, thank you. Any other just thoughts or anything? Steve, do you have what you need or?
I do. And what I'll do is when Mike gets back, we'll go through all the discussion from tonight and we'll prepare it for our presentation to the Plan Commission on March 2nd.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Nimbley.
Thank you, everybody, for kind of taking this out of order and giving me a chance to get it moving a little bit quicker. I do really appreciate it.
Sure.
Very good.
Yep, thank you. Okay. Item number last. Blue Agave Cantina Grill Supplemental Liquor License. Steve?
Hey, thank you, Mayor Gaffino. In fall of 2020, Blue Agave, we had some noise complaints, and as you recall, they met with former Mayor Berman at the time as liquor commissioner, and it was brought back to the village board that their supplemental A license, which allows for basically single or duo acts or acoustic music, that type of things, that they were looking for something with a larger presence like DJs and bands and whatnot. So in November, they came back and asked the board for a supplemental entertainment B license, which the board discussed the proximity of the location to the neighboring adjacent neighborhood, which would be Silver Trails. And in that conversation, ultimately the conditions on the license were that the business would be allowed to have the supplemental B entertainment license, but that they would limit entertainment to once a week, either on a Friday or a Saturday, and that it would be off at 10 p.m., that all of the noise would, the entertainment would be over by 10 p.m. on that night. January alone, we had some more complaints about noise. They were found to be in violation of the liquor code 3 times. The liquor commissioner held a meeting recently with them, offered them in our informal meeting process, we offered them a plea bargain, which includes a fine and 6 months probation. Should they violate it again, it would result in a 3-day suspension of their license and possible further review and action. But in the meantime, in that conversation, Blue Agave's ownership stated that they understand the issues that they've had, and they are really looking to ask the board if they can extend the supplemental B's conditions from 10 p.m. and Friday or Saturday to once a week, Saturday nights. And we put 1 a.m. in the memo, but they were talking about midnight or 1. And what we said is, if we're going to bring it back to the board for discussion, we would start with 1 a.m. and then have the board make their discussion on whether they thought that was reasonable, and then work backwards if they felt there was a better time that made sense. So before you tonight is, just throwing you the background, but the other stuff with their current liquor license situation is already being handled by the liquor commissioner. This is specifically about changing the conditions of their current supplemental B entertainment license and moving the 10 p.m. Restriction to a later time, and to also allow them, instead of Friday or Saturday, just limit it to Saturdays.
I'm not in favor of this at all. I think that they have not shown any willingness to comply with the existing ordinance. And I recall when we discussed this the last time, we actually talked about going later on their application, and because they didn't ask for it, we agreed to the 10 o'clock. I'm not in favor of amending or changing the supplemental liquor license until they can show compliance with the existing liquor license after the 6-month probation period. Then they can come, in my opinion, then they should come back and ask for something more.
Yeah, I think that due to all the complaints of the noise, in my opinion, like Mark, is that I like to see them comply to what we already asked them to. And right now, I don't feel that way. I don't feel that they've really wanted to comply. So I would agree with Mark. I think that we need to, maybe have them come back in 6 months. 1 o'clock's a late time for a lot of people, and then noise is loud, and there's homes back there. That's where I'm at.
I agree with both Mark Carroll and Mark Gately here. What's to keep? They haven't demonstrated any willingness to comply with the existing law as is. What happens if they then decide not to comply with if we allow this, the new levels of operation? What if they go to 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. or have it on Friday night as well? I don't know what they're going to do, so I'm kind of inclined to do that as well. My heart goes out to the people that live right behind them. I kind of looked at those houses back there. They're very close. And I'm sure they have families back there, and they kind of want to get to sleep, despite the fact that it's on a Saturday night. And I'm also wanted to say this, that in terms of compliance, I'm wondering if there's some way we could then have a graduating kind of response to subsequent infractions as time goes on, rather than keeping it at a low level at the same level each time. I don't know. Steve, does it increase with each violation, or?
Well, in this case, what happened is they have a plea agreement that's essentially offered to them. Should they not accept the plea, then it would go through a formal hearing process. And if they go through a formal hearing process, both the village and the ownership of that restaurant would present their case. And the liquor commissioner ultimately can make a decision that's lesser, the same, or even more than what we've offered already. So there are codes in state statute that allow you to increase fines. I don't have them in front of me, but I believe for each offense. Our code has a limitation on certain offenses, but that is something that Mayor Graffino has brought to my attention as something maybe we would look at for future.
Yeah, I kind of like Trustee Carroll's idea of letting them go through, like, say, a 6-month period to demonstrate that there would be no violations of the existing contract or code, and then go from there, and then let them then come back and ask for an expansion of their hours or whatever they're asking.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable approach. They're still continuing to have complaints, and now they want to extend it by, another 2 to 3 hours, which I think is really late for a residential neighborhood. I don't know. I know it's just one night a week. That's what they're saying. But 1 o'clock in the morning, when you have to look forward, you go to bed at 10, and every Saturday night, you know that this music is going to be blaring for another 3 hours. I mean, I think that's really late, and I think that they haven't. If they haven't complied, then I agree with Trustee Carroll that they should be shown that they can comply with what is already, and then come back and see if it warrants another look to give them a later time.
Thank you. Trustee Curtis, any thoughts?
Part of me, when you buy a house back into retail space, you're kind of operating under the understanding that there may not be a restaurant, or maybe, you're not going to have that same privacy and quiet location you're going to have backing to other residential homes. And that's reflected in the prices of homes that tend to back to a retail strip mall. And I'm trying to think, the best way to balance this, because we do have a business that has a right to operate. And if our ordinances and if the law says they're allowed to operate as a live music venue or have a DJ or whatever it is until midnight or 1 a.m., we certainly can't be hostile to the right of that business to operate the way that they're allowed to operate. I do think Mark has a great point about they're on probation. We have no requirement to be accommodating to them when they've already proven that they're not playing within the rules. But that said, I mean, I don't, this is just something that we're deferring right now. I mean, it's going to come back in 6 months, and then what? And that's kind of what the big problem is going to be, because do they have the legal right to operate until 1 a.m.? I mean, can somebody give me some clarification on that?
Well, I would start with that, and if Kevin wants to jump in, he can. So the conditions that are put on this supplemental license were the conditions that were given by the board. The license itself runs with the liquor license. So in theory, if the liquor license is till 1, 5 days a week, and 2 a.m. the other 2, the entertainment would be able to be played till that time, until liquor is stopped to be sold. And so by that logic, to point that out again, is the restrictions that are currently on it are restrictions that we placed on it at an earlier time. As far as the probation goes, should the board want to do the 6-month period for probation and then bring it back, that is, one possibility. But one other possibility would be too, is if you chose to give them a later time now and they violated it again, the theory would be is that you bring them back to a formal hearing, where if you go to a formal hearing, the mayor has the right to revoke the license or suspend the license. And plus, you automatically, in that plea agreement, if they sign it, they automatically have a 3-day suspension of the license if they violate.
And
So-
you're not just referring to the Class B, you're talking about their entire liquor license.
Correct. And we
Clarity,
made sure
yeah.
to put in the plea agreement that it goes back to, you know, what, call it the mother license, the parent license, if you will. It goes back to their Class A license.
Just a clarification. They, with a regular liquor license and the supplemental entertainment license they had before, they could have entertainment, but it just would be limited to like, one or two acoustic, guitar players or something like that. So what they came in for was an expanded entertainment license that allowed louder music, a DJ, and so on. That with their regular liquor license, aside from the entertainment, they can be open as late as our liquor code says they can be open and sell liquor, which is much later than the limitation on the entertainment that we had imposed on the louder music.
Which is non-amplified, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, I think it allows, like, you can have amplification, but it's limited to like acoustic, or it's not loud.
I'm very sensitive to Laura's point about, wanting to help a business that, especially one that just started during COVID. But the issue I have is, number one, I don't want to reward some non-compliance. And second, we want to create a level playing field for all our businesses. If one business can flout their liquor license, then what does that say to the other businesses that are all following it? I just don't, I don't think it's fair. And I think until they've demonstrated a willingness to comply with what they've already asked for, they asked for it. We didn't impose it. And they haven't done that. So I think this request is premature until they've shown and demonstrated that they can comply with what they've already agreed to.
I agree with that. I think, we should just enact the 6-month probation period and then take a look at it again and proceed from then.
My one of my concerns was that, and I brought it up last time when they came through, that it doesn't become like a dance club, so that's not the proper zoning for that anyway. And I know there's been some discussion about how do we determine if it's a dance club or not. But I mean, that place was, the photos I've seen online, that place was packed, no mask. I mean, it's just, and the crowd it was drawing. I know Chief Fisher can probably add to this, but there are some concerns about things of that nature. So besides just bothering the neighbors, I mean, the complaints are over by Goodwin School. They could hear the music. I mean, that's pretty loud, and that's 3 blocks away. So, but like I said, that area, yeah, it's a business area, and people bought backed up to those, but it wasn't the zoning or the plan in there wasn't to have like a dance club and have that kind of stuff going on. It was restaurants, different types, small businesses, things like that. So, Chief Fisher, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, if I could, thanks. I'm looking at the map right now, and there's, because those are each unit has 2, it's a duplex basically. There's 16 units altogether just on the one side that back up to that place. And looking at the map, I don't even think they're 100 feet away. And the units were there, correct me if I'm wrong, before the strip mall was. And to your point, Mayor, that I think that bothers me the most is that when they originally got their license or got their original license, it was for a restaurant. It was not for a nightclub. And I've spoke to the officers that have been there on calls, and there's one night there were 120 vehicles, just vehicles alone in the parking lot, which means there's way more than that, many more people inside of it. Nobody wearing masks, no social distancing, and my officers got to go in there and try to take care of that. It's like a super spreader event. So it very much, I think, has turned into what I would call a nightclub as well. I mean, we've had 17 total calls there altogether, and they just opened up July 8th, I believe. Now, not all of them have been, noise related. Some are social distancing. Some were officer initiated for extra patrol because of some of the issues. So I'm not saying pull their license. I'm not saying any of that. I am very business friendly. But I do agree with the majority of the trustees that have spoken up when they say, how about if we just wait and see how the 6-month period goes and kind of go from there.
All right, thanks. Any other comments, Dow?
Yeah. I don't those places have an occupancy number of people that they can exceed or not supposed to exceed?
Yes.
So they were perhaps exceeding that number that they're not supposed to.
Possibly.
Well, especially with the COVID restrictions.
Right.
They're supposed to be what, at 25%
Right.
of.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I wanted to throw something out there. I think 6 months, we're at February, right? Mid-February. So that would be March, April, May, June, July, August, right? So would you guys consider perhaps put him on a 3-month probation? So this guy's perhaps, have 3 months to literally well behave and show proof that they're walking a straight line and they're really making an effort to make things happen. The way we're basically giving them the benefit, so we can have this review, because otherwise it would be, mid-September, late September, if they're able to have this by that time. Someone already missed the whole warm time. I was just thinking about that. I do agree that I like them to proof first. But I was just, that would be something you guys would over the 6-month mark.
Your thoughts? Steve, so looks like we're at the 6-month, and see what they do after that.
Okay, we'll let them know tomorrow.
All right, very good. Thank you. Okay, need a motion to adjourn the exec session, and we will be meeting afterwards. So we'll be coming back to committee of the whole.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Second.
Aye.
Any opposed? Same sign. Okay, we're going to exec session.